And now it's time for our interview. Sarah Woodson is a member of the Marijuana Licensing Work Group that met last week for the first time. When I tuned into the public live stream last Thursday, I heard over 20 people on this call, from city council members to members of the police, Denver Public Schools, advocates, small business owners, and some of the larger operators in the state. It seemed to me that Sarah is one of the best prepared and one of the people most oriented to finding solutions to make sure that equity is part of cannabis home delivery here in Denver. Now look, we've heard a lot about equity in cannabis throughout the industry, but here in Colorado in the home, we've never done anything that attempts to take this industry and use it to give back and right the wrongs of the drug war. That's what they're doing in this working group, and I thought that was fascinating. Something happening in real time in our home city. I know I have a lot of cannabis friends here in Denver who care about this issue. Well, this is happening right now, and we should all be paying attention. So check out this interview with Sarah Woodson and look up her organization operating here in Denver called Color of Cannabis. Now let's get to the interview.
So my name is Sarah Woodson, and I'm the executive director of the Color of Cannabis. I also own a hospitality business called Cushion Canvases. What we do at the Color of Cannabis is advocate for policy, education, technical, and mentorship support. And so we want to do that on all levels, because you have to meet people where they are. There will be people that want licenses, but there are also people that just want to be a bud tender, which is the front line. So that's a very important job. Then there's people that want C-suite positions. So we want to be able to be the pipeline to connect those people with the industry. We want to be able to work with industry to create policy that will make sure that people do have an opportunity and an equal playing field, especially now in Colorado when we're 10 years in a saturated market. So that's what we do.
Awesome. So I became most aware of you from tuning in last week to the Marijuana Licensing Working Group. So can you just tell us what that licensing group, kind of the mission and what the outcome of that will be?
So the purpose of this work group is to get some advisory feedback from stakeholders regarding the rollout of delivery, hospitality, how a social equity program should look. And then there should be about 8 remaining retail licenses in Denver. And so kind of get some feedback on how social equity plays into all of those, but also how it should be rolled out. So each city has an option to opt in. You don't have to opt into delivery, and you don't have to opt into hospitality. There's already cities that have said they're not going to do hospitality and they're not going to do delivery. And then there's places like Glendale that have already opted into delivery and hospitality, but a very small group of people are able to participate over there. So, yeah.
General framework wise from the state, the delivery licenses will be given out to some dispensaries and then some independent companies that have their own transporter license. Is that right?
So the way that delivery works is 2020, right now, anybody can opt into delivery, but medical only, right? And so a medical company right now cannot hire a transporter. They have to do in-house medical only.
Okay.
Okay, so then 2021, you can do retail and medical, of course, and a medical can then hire a transporter. And of course, retail can hire a transporter. So the business has to get a permit, and then the transporter has to get a permit. And of course, that's where the relationship between the transporter and the retail store is so important. And then you can start delivering.
There was a strong contingent in the call advocating for, we're not going to be able to do much with what the state has given us, so let's just focus on getting delivery to the people. You know, people want delivery and we're going to get that as soon as possible. And then there were a few very strong voices pushing on the equity side saying we need to really focus on this. And I felt like you were trying to really be practical and say, like, all right, we want to move on equity. Let's not get bogged down in the idealistic. Let's look at what the state law can give us and what we can do with it. So, you know, if you were not on a 20-person working group, but we're just the czar of Denver cannabis, you know, what do you think is the absolute best thing we could do with this law to do equity right in Denver with what the state's given us?
Absolutely. So it would have to definitely be robust. One of the things that I think is the most practical and fair way to go about it is a 1-for-1, which I keep on throwing out and I will continue to throw out. And so basically, when someone applies, if they're not a social equity applicant, they would still be able to apply for their delivery business, but there would be a social equity license then just set aside. So it doesn't have to be issued, it just needs to be set aside. And so that gives people an opportunity to operate, because there are people that have been waiting. And I personally know someone, and she's a woman-owned business, and she's been waiting for a while to be able to deliver. And so we want to keep business and we want to keep social equity. So we need to figure out how to marry those. And so I would just say definitely a 1-for-1 across the board. And it should just be that simple. But of course, it's never just that simple. But that's what I would push for.
I feel like in cannabis, because it's a lot of startups, everybody is very personally invested in their business. And a lot of times that comes into the equity conversation because people take it almost like as a personal front. I've been sitting here waiting for this license. The friend that you're referring to, who might not be a social equity applicant, is saying, hey, I'm not a social equity applicant, but I've been working so hard and putting blood, sweat, and tears into this little baby startup. And now you're telling me that, I'm the privileged person and I need to give up a license or something like that. And I feel like you do a good job of accepting that, yes, that argument is going to come out and we need to meet people where they're at, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to still push for equity. I wonder how you balance those two when you're talking to a business owner who might look at it just through that business lens.
So I just try to, take everyone's perspective into consideration. Should you have to wait to get your license if you've been prepping for 2 years and you're not a social equity applicant? No. Should social equity applicants have an opportunity to get licenses and be first to market? Yes. So how do we make that happen? Okay, you get your license, a social equity license will be put aside. To me, it just makes perfect sense, Right. And then while that's happening, one of the things that I do is constantly work with the larger operators, because again, we don't want to just single them out. If you're going to have social equity applicants that really are doing delivery, you have to have a relationship with the larger operators, because those are the people that are going to have to hire you. So if we sit in a work group and we say the larger operators are horrible, they don't want to let anyone in, and go down that line, then how do you create a relationship and have real respectful business with people? It's impossible. So you try to be diplomatic, you hear where everyone's at, and you come up with solutions that make it work for everyone.
To get a little more into specifics, can we define what, and maybe this is not defined yet, but what would be a social equity applicant?
So the social equity definitions would be, and I'm going to say this, and you remember while I'm saying this, you only have to qualify for one. You have had to had a cannabis conviction or arrest or property seized during like a cannabis arrest, a seizure, right? And that could be you, a mother, a sister, a brother, or like your parental guardian. Or you had to have lived in a high crime area or a place where there was a lot of cannabis arrests between a certain amount of time. And that piece is so important because of gentrification. And I think that they just didn't take into consideration the gentrification piece. Or you have to make under the Colorado medium income for your family size. And so because that income is there, because the most pushback, or what people will say, well, what about veterans? What about LGBTQ? What about disabled? Well, social equity in cannabis is to be able to repair and restore people in communities that were negatively affected by the war on drugs. So that really shouldn't be a conversation. But because of where we live, because of how our state is based when it comes to race, you have to make sure that you're including everyone. This isn't a California or a Chicago or a New York, right? So how do we do that? Well, we do. Go ahead.
I was going to say, in those cities, the difference you're saying there is that the Black and brown communities have the kind of political power and the will to really demand their seat at the table and say, no, this is supposed to help our communities because we were the communities targeted by the war on drugs. And out here, that community is just not as powerful in Denver.
Bingo. And so I identified that, and I keep on telling people that It's not like that here. So therefore we have to figure out how we can make it work for everyone. And so that income will essentially allow people that, you know, don't really qualify as what a traditional social equity candidate would be, to be able to come in and qualify if they don't exceed the income. Now, you know, if you exceed the income, then I'm sorry, it's not for you. We've tried our best. We're race neutral. We've came to the table with something that can work for a lot of people. And if you can't get in under any of those three, then it's just not for you. We can't make it any broader, you know?
Yeah. So it is race neutral, though, which, like you said, in some areas of the country it would not be, but here you're saying that practically solution-wise, that is the way we're moving forward with it because that's what works in Colorado politics.
Exactly. And that's what we're trying to get amended into the accelerator bill as we speak. Like Chicago, there's no income at all, but you have to have lived in a high crime designated area or have a cannabis felony, period. And there was nobody saying, well, what about disabled? What about LGBTQ? What about veterans? Because the Black and brown population there is strong enough and they have enough political power to say, hey, don't do that. But
Right.
here we just don't. So we have to, you know, face some things that are reality pretty much, and come to the table and figure out how we can work with industry to have a good, robust program.
Sometimes I feel like in the debate about the war on drugs and repairing the communities that were harmed, it I almost noticed that the passive voice is used, right? These were communities that were harmed by the war. Like it's almost like just this unfortunate accident that happened is almost the way the debate is sometimes framed. Whereas history shows us very clearly that it was not a coincidence or an accident. This war was waged on these communities, and that's why I think cannabis should view it as an honor that we are now going to be able to reverse one of the worst things, you know, the tail end of oppression in America that went from slavery to Jim Crow to segregation to the war on drugs.
And also mass incarceration was directly reflected from that. You know, I was on a call yesterday, and when we got off the call, we did some follow up, and someone had made a statement, and I'm like, no, you know, the reason why the person had to say that is because it's hard being Black in America. You know, oh my gosh, you couldn't even understand it unless you really walked in the shoes of a Black person. You know, if you're an educated Black person, you have to watch your words. You have to be overly polite. You have to, you know, make sure that you're doing enough to please your own community. Then you have to make sure that you're pleasing white people over here. And then you have to make sure that you're not offending anyone. Then, you know, if you're not, you get stereotyped for everything, whether if it's your hair, what you're wearing. You can't walk down the street without someone thinking you're a criminal. You know, then you turn on the news and this is what people believe all Black people are. And it's just hard being Black in America. And a lot of that is based off how Black people got here, right? I've had an experience where my mother was African. And so my experience was a lot different than maybe what a traditional Black American person would experience, because African people don't have the trauma and the damage that slavery has done to Black American people. So when we talk about the war on drugs, it's still affecting people as of now, right? But it's funny because we live in a world where capitalism rules. It's profit over people. And you see that right now during COVID. You know, people don't want to pay workers extra money, and they're in, you know, over here in DC, and they're arguing about everything, as opposed to how do we help people? How do we help people? How do we help people? And so it would be, what you would think is that the larger companies would say, you know what, we have to fix this. We want to help people. But that's not their concern, because that's never been their experience. And that's why I always try to tell like all my white friends is like, hey, I shouldn't be your only Black friend. You need to get around other people. You need to get around Black people. You need to understand what people are going through and how they're living. Because when you understand people, then if you're in a position where you have the largest dispensary company in Colorado, and you really know people that have been affected, or you have lived that way, you have a better understanding of why it needs to happen. But if you've never experienced poverty, if you've never experienced violence, if you've never experienced a lack of access to education and all the things that people experience when they're living in poverty and poor communities, then you just can't relate. And so that's why the approach that I take is not to try to tell you how horrible you are and what you should and should not do. I just want to talk about how can we make a solution based on what we want and what you want.
When it comes to the war on drugs and the bad side of things, we talk about how one person becoming incarcerated is like a pyramid of effects, right, on his family and maybe her children and all this, the way it ripples out through the community. But we can flip that on its head in a positive way too and say every single license that we put into a community that needs it, it's going to be a pyramid of positivity, hopefully, right? The money will be flowing into the community. They will be hiring people they know from their community. People that work for them will now see that this is a business that they could maybe get in. 20 years from now, people who were just drivers for them might be owners of their own company. And so there's a pyramid effect on the positive side as well there.
Exactly. And that's why it's social equity in cannabis is supposed to help repair and restore communities and people. And the same way that, we're holding um, the city accountable and the state accountable and, the large operators, it has to be the same for the people that get these licenses. In California and Chicago and other places like that, if you get these licenses, you then are required to hire other social equity candidates. If you get these licenses, you then are required to give, like California has like a 5% community reinvestment or something like that. You're required to do this because absolutely that's what it's supposed to do. I always say the thing that makes your experience so differently in America, regardless of your color, is where you were born, where you grew up, where you were raised. Because if you were raised in the ghetto, whether if you're white or black, that's going to be your experience. And you really have to get around mentorship and good people to be able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. That mentality that people think, oh, if you're born in poverty, it's just so easy to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Okay, you go live in the projects for 20 years and let me see how easy it is for you. So I always say the great equalizer is education, economics, and access. Those are the great equalizers. So if you get one of these licenses, you are absolutely, you need to be required and held accountable to make sure that you're reaching back and helping other people. And you don't just have yours and you go. And that's one of the biggest things. I hold everybody accountable when it comes to this. If you are currently in the industry and you're black or you're brown, the same way that you want white folks to reach back and help out, you need to do that as well. So as a black person or a brown person, you also are responsible for helping your own people enter the industry as well. And I mean that to the fullest. We have to help each other out. We can't ask other people to help each other out and we don't. So, that's just one of the things that I'm really serious about is helping my own people out.
Yeah. Bringing people up behind you for sure.
Exactly.
Kind of one last question. Just moving forward here, you've got, I think, at least 3 more meetings. I was a little worried for you guys, honestly, because I'm like, 20 people on this call. I don't know how anything's gonna ever be done. It's just gonna be around and around. So we'll hope that that's not going to be the problem. But what would you like to see? What details do you want to get into, or what do you want to see hammered out in these next few meetings that people can tune into if they would like to?
Well, I think that, the city's done a good job at making it a priority and moving forward, even though logistically it's not ideal, right? They did send out follow-up and there were questions. Like, it's funny because people just jumped in and started talking about equity. And I think what the city, and it's because they just really didn't read the presentation, because equity was down the line, but because they didn't read it, they just wanted to make sure that we talked about it. And that was great. So I think one of the things is that people have to read the presentations. And if you read the presentations, then, you'll know that there's a place for this conversation. I think that if we could do that, it'll be a lot better. People will be more prepared. And we we're probably, I know there's only 4, but honestly, we probably need more than 4. I know the next one is hospitality. So we just need to really figure out how the licenses are going to be rolled out and how equity is going to overlay all the licenses. And that's what I would like to see. But there, who knows what's going to happen? People are really passionate when it comes to equity and race relations. And then on the other side of it, for white people, they feel like really uncomfortable and like they can't talk about it. So that's the dynamic you basically are seeing on the call right now,
Do we need if people are watching this and they care about this issue, do we need people's voices in this right now, or do you feel like that's not really the stage we're in? Right now it's about hammering out the policy. Do we need the industry to be following along? And if you're living in the city of Denver, maybe paying attention, maybe calling your city council member down the line, do you think that there's going to be a need for that, or is this just much more in the bureaucracy side of government right now?
I think it's a little bit of both. And I think that's what people need to understand. We definitely have to get the policy hammered out, but we know that the elephant in the room is social equity. And because that's the case, people do need to be involved. You need to listen. Denver did a really good job at making this work group diverse. But for the longest, and still now, every time I walk into any room and it's regarding cannabis policy, there's like two Black people, So people have to get involved. You have to be aware of what's going on. You need to tune in. We do a lot of engagement with our members and, try to get people in. But even for members, unless they're absolutely ready and this is what they want and they're sure about it, they have their priorities, and this might not be one. But I think the more that people show up, the more that people listen, the more that people are involved, people of color, Black people, brown people, then we have more opportunity to see and get the things that we're asking for done.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today, and wish you luck in the future meetings. I'll definitely be tuning in, and maybe we can talk about it again in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.